Welcome back to some new r/malicious compliance stories, where people comply to the letter, but not the spirit of a request. I hope you had a great day. Thanks for all the likes and comments on the last video. And now, let's start with the first story. It's called Always Right. A few years back, I worked for a brick making firm. I was using the cuber, a machine that would push the bricks and blocks onto a wooden pallet. I was tasked with stacking newly made bricks on pallets and stacking said pallets in the shed to keep them out of the weather. I was using the new pallets like we normally do for the bricks, as they would be stacked 4 pallets high. My boss yelled at me, saying, "Just use the old pallets." I replied with, "The old pallets are not strong enough for that weight." Well, he was always right and demanded to do as he said. Skip to a few hours later, and I hear my boss yelling and swearing up a storm. One of the old pallets at the bottom collapsed, destroying about 4K worth of product. He starts yelling at me, putting the blame on me. This was a long time coming, and I was done being blamed for his screw-ups. I stood over him and started yelling back. "You told me to use the old pallets. I did as you said, so don't you dare blame me for your screw-up." I then turned around and left. He didn't like to admit he was wrong, but when I got to my station the next Monday, there was a new toolkit sitting there for me. The next story is called Want Them. In the late 70s, I went to a Girl Scout camp. It was great, but one night they served boiled spinach, and as fate would have it, I'd been playing with pond moss that very afternoon. Add to this that I tried spinach once at a friend's house, and I threw up. My mom despised spinach, so it hadn't crossed my plate any other time. At dinner that night, our vegetable was boiled spinach. I told the counselors, "I can't eat this, I throw up. If you don't take at least 3 brownie bites, you can't have dessert." "What is dessert?" I queried. "Ice cream sandwiches," answered the counselors. Game on. "Okay, I want that. I'm going to take a bite and puke. Should I aim for the railing?" It was semi-outdoors. The counselors had stopped caring. Sounds good. I took the bite, swallowed it, and promptly puked over the railing. Suddenly they were all action and rushed me to the one-stall bathroom that was occupied. I puked in the sink until the vile green stuff was out of my system. As I wiped my mouth with the paper towel, I said, "So, do I need to take my other 2 bites?" Several counselors asked me shortly thereafter, "If you knew you were going to throw up, why did you eat it?" I love ice cream sandwiches. My sweet mother raised hell upon my return from camp that summer, and the forced 3-bite rule went away for many, many years. The third story is called Change the Name. Years ago, a gentleman owned a chain of auto parts stores. He always named each store, name of town, auto parts, and put the initials on the building. One of the stores was in a town that starts with a W, inadvertently placing an, at the time, racial slur at the building. After being up there for many years, the city fathers, think City Hall today, came down and told him he needed to take that down, because it's offensive. The owner said, "It's the initials of the business. How is it offensive?" The city says, "We don't care. Take it down, or else." At that point, the owner looks them in the eye and says, "Okay, I'll change the business name to Frank's United Chicken Kitchen and put those initials up there." It took the fathers all of a minute to say, "Never mind, keep it like it is." They left and never had any other issues with them about the sign. The next story is called Preach Your Compliance. I'm a pastor in a large denomination that takes years to become fully recognized or ordained as a clergy person. There are several interviews with different teams to see if a person is fit to serve. I was already past 4 steps and working on the last and final step to be ordained. Part of the step required recording and submitting a sermon on one of only a set number of biblical texts. Sermons using outside texts would not be accepted. At the time, I was an associate pastor in a relatively large church. almost 1,000 on a Sunday between multiple services, and I was initially hired to be one of the primary preachers. However, the senior pastor would set the sermon series, sermon topics, and scriptures for each Sunday. We were asked to stay on theme and on topic for any service in which we preached. Soon after I arrived at this church, the senior pastor, who had been there for many years, announced their retirement. An interim would take their place until the next long-term pastor was selected. We'll call this interim Pastor Richard. The first time I met with Pastor Richard, after the former pastor's retirement and his start, he told me that he didn't think I had what it took to be a pastor. He then proceeded to strip me of nearly all my pastoral responsibilities. Prior to his arrival, I regularly preached 3 or 4 Sundays a month, was called for visits, and oversaw the sacraments. After the meeting with Pastor Richard, I was relegated to organizing a team of 125 volunteers, ensuring we had liturgists, ushers, greeters, and parking lot attendants. My preaching was also cut to just once a month, at best. And even though I was working on my paperwork for the final step toward ordination, Pastor Richard refused to schedule any of the biblical texts required for the sermon for my ordination paperwork. To his credit, he did say that I could use whatever verses from the Bible that I wanted, so long as I stayed on theme for the sermon and series. However, I refuse to bend scripture to say something that it doesn't. If a text is about forgiveness, I won't try and proof text it to make it fit a theme of justice. Somehow, every time I was scheduled to preach, the theme of the sermon did not fit any of the handful of texts I was allowed to preach for my paperwork. Eventually, Pastor Richard's interim tenure was drawing to a close. There was one Sunday between his departure and the next senior pastor's arrival. That Sunday was not part of a sermon series and did not have a selected theme. It was preacher's choice. This would have been perfect, because I could get at least one sermon recorded for my paperwork to submit. Usually you'd want to record all of the texts, so that you could choose the best one of the group. However, I was not scheduled as one of the preachers for any of the services. The 2 scheduled preachers for Sunday were Greg and Sarah. Greg was not a pastor and was not on track to become a pastor. So I went to Pastor Richard and asked if I could take Greg's place, so that I could record at least one sermon for submission for ordination. Richard told me that I could not switch with Greg, and he would not allow me to take his place. I agreed that I would not take Greg's place, and left his office. But shortly after I left Richard's office, I went over and met with Sarah. I knew she wanted that particular weekend off, so I offered to switch preaching assignments. I would take the weekend I wanted, and she would switch for a weekend a month down the line. Sarah immediately agreed, and I went to the person who sent out our weekly email and had the information switched. I did not ask permission, and I did not tell Richard what I had done. The email went out on Wednesday night, and on Thursday morning, when Richard came in, the first thing he did was come into my office. He demanded to know why I disobeyed his order. I simply pointed out that he told me I couldn't preach in Greg's place, which I wasn't. Instead, I would preach in Sarah's place. There wasn't much he could do, because the information had already been sent out to the church. So he left my office in a rage. I preached on Sunday, using one of the required texts, and used it to submit for the final step in my ordination. Unfortunately, I was not ordained that year. It would take me another year beyond that. But the look on his face when he realized I had followed his order to the letter, and there was nothing he could do about it, still makes me chuckle years later. The 5th story is called Drunk Assistant. A man was hired as my assistant at a tech-oriented business. He spent his breaks and his lunches getting drunk. I overlooked his behavior and covered for him, because he was going through a contentious divorce. Surprisingly, he eventually accused me of treating him like crap. Then he engaged in a profanity-laden rant, where he accused me of a lot of stuff, before telling me to leave him the heck alone. Yes, I now know that I was enabling his behavior, but I had once gone through a messy divorce of my own, and I was feeling sorry for him. Cue the Malicious Compliance. I stopped covering for him. Cold turkey. It was bad enough when no one could find him, because he was passed out in his car. But being passed out on the floor of the men's room, with his trousers around his ankles, on Customer Appreciation Day, earned him a dismissal. Of course, he said it was all my fault. It was not, because it was discovered that I was capable of doing both my work and the work of my assistant. I was allowed to work on my own after that, and without any adult supervision of my own. The last story is called All the Passwords. I work for an MSP, and yesterday one of my larger accounts told us out of the blue that they had decided to change MSPs, because they wanted to go a different direction moving forward, and wanted to do the handover today. None of the regular handover period. Nothing to justify the abrupt way this has been handled. No allegations of incompetence or wrongdoing. So to make the handover as secure as possible, and to protect the passwords document from potentially snooping in transit, I converted the 11-page document to pictures and imported them into a new doc. Usernames, passwords, URLs and encryption keys, all gonna have to be typed out. Thanks for watching the video. I hope you enjoyed it. If you did, please don't forget to leave a like, comment and subscribe. And if you have time, watch another one of my videos. And now, I hope you have a great day. See you soon. Bye bye.